Thank you for tuning into this video. If you're here, it's probably because you're interested in how to use AI as a game master, and how it might be able to improve your game and your creative process and flow. So before I jump into how I use AI, let me talk a little bit about my initial sort of experience with it. When it first started coming out, everyone was talking about ChatGPT, and I checked it out. And I'll be honest, I mean, it didn't strike me as anything all that impressive. Maybe almost like a glorified search engine, but nothing really that mind-blowing. There were a few times where I used it to help with a game, usually for like random list generation, things like names or, loot and things like that. Just when I needed something real quick, I decided to give it a shot, see if it would help. And, it did. There were a couple times where I was trying to brainstorm some things, and I was able to, tell it what I needed, and it would give me some stuff. But it never gave me anything that was all that impressive. And to be honest, even today, if you were to go in as a game master, let's say you've got to run a game this afternoon, and you went in there like, hey, I'm a game master, I'm running a game today, and I need you to give me something to run. I'll be honest, it's going to give you hot garbage. It's not going to miraculously produce anything worth running at your table. So what changed? Well, one day I was just scrolling through my feed on YouTube, and one of the suggested videos was about AI. Specifically, it was something along the lines of how to master AI, or how to get the most out of AI, something along those lines. And so, with AI being such a topic of conversation lately, I decided, like, let me give it a watch. See what AI is all about, at least according to these folks. And I'll be honest, it was pretty surprising when they were talking about what it was capable of. But they also spoke about why most folks use AI wrong, and how to actually use it correctly in order to leverage it for all of the processing power that it has. And it got me to thinking, is the problem with AI up until this point, at least in my experience, using it, as a supplemental source for things for my game, was it more about how I was approaching it rather than the tool itself? So I decided to go down the proverbial rabbit hole, and really set a bunch of things up, and see how it would work for me. And I'll be honest, I was shocked at how good of an experience I had with it, and how ultimately helpful the AI was when it came to helping me create content for my game. So what changed here then? What was I doing differently? Well, basically, I am now able to go into the one that I'm using is Claude, and I'll talk to you momentarily about why. I can go into Claude, and I can, if I've got an idea for my campaign that I'm trying to work through and I'm not sure about, I can put that idea in there. And in that idea, I might be referencing factions in my game. For context, I'm currently running a Fallout game. So I can tell it about the Legion. I can tell it about the New California Republic. I can tell it about this location, that location, this NPC, that NPC. I could tell it about this player character or that player character. And it knows everything I'm talking about. It knows all these things. It understands it. And it understands it in the context of my campaign. It also knows my preferences for content creation. It knows my philosophy and my beliefs about how to approach a game. Um, it knows all of these things. So when I give it my my idea, it's able to then give me recommendations and feedback that's consistent with my campaign world and my way of looking at gaming. Um, it also knows all of the plots that I'm running in my game. It knows the main plot. It knows a lot of the important subplots. It knows all of the player character specific plots that I'm running. It knows some of the ideas I have for future plots. And it can provide me with feedback consistent with all that and doesn't conflict with any of that. And it's able to keep track of all of this. If you've ever when you've been running games, things happen. And maybe weeks or months later, you forget about this thing that happened months ago. Claude doesn't forget. And so when something that happened months ago is relevant to something that I'm creating now, Claude's able to remind me of it. This is pretty amazing. Claude's able to function as an incredibly useful assistant, a second brain that remembers all of these things about my game that I sometimes lose track of or forget. It's also able to make suggestions for game content that's also consistent with my campaign. So this is great. That old adage that sometimes folks talk about, like, what if you could clone yourself? Well, I kind of did. I created a version of myself that lives within Claude and is able to provide me with feedback, provide me with suggestions and recommendations that are consistent with how I think about games and is also consistent with my campaign world. That's amazing. Now, another thing that is really incredible here, when you think about TV, TV shows, let's say any of your favorite comedies or dramas or things like Saturday Night Live, one person isn't sitting there creating all of these things for the most part. There's a writer's room. And in that writer's room, someone comes up with an idea, or maybe the seed of an idea. They put it out there, and now all the writers are bouncing back and forth with that idea, developing it into what eventually makes it onto the TV screen. When you're a GM, you don't have that. It's just you. And when I think about my own personal life, the one friend that I have who's also a game master, who I could potentially bounce campaign ideas off of, or talk to about problems I'm having in the game, or things I'm struggling with in terms of where I might want to go with this villain or that faction. I can't talk about with him because he's a player in my game. And obviously talking to him about these things would just be spoiler city. So I can't do it. So it's really just me. Now, in theory, I could go into a Facebook group or onto Reddit and post something. But really, that's only... I guess I could inundate these forums, but then people would get sick of me. So really, I can only do that with something big and really challenging I might want to get other people's feedback on. But what about the small little day-to-day decisions I have to make with the game that I wouldn't mind having some feedback on? Claude can do that. I can take a little germ of idea I have, throw it into Claude, and Claude be like, oh, that's a great idea. Or, you know what, you've got something there, but here are some issues that I'm seeing. Or it could be like, no, that's a terrible idea. And this is why. Because maybe the idea I have, great example, maybe I have an idea for something an NPC might do. But what if the idea I have is completely inconsistent with who that NPC is as a character? Claude will point that out to me. then Claude and I can work out. So let's say I'm really committed to this idea. Um, Claude and I can then brainstorm back and forth together on how to make that idea both work and be consistent with the NPC. Maybe an idea I'm suggesting conflicts with something that's already happened in the game, something I forgot about. Claude will remind me of the conflict. And this is something that's incredibly helpful. And so Claude is able to function as this writer's room. It can function as those multiple brains that you want to bounce things off of. And I find that incredibly helpful. The other thing that I think is worth considering here, as you're deciding whether or not AI is going to be helpful for you, you might want to consider your style as a GM, or your strengths and your weaknesses as a GM. So for me personally, I struggle if I'm just sitting in front of a blank page or a blank screen and I have to create from scratch. I'm not at my best when it comes to that. Historically, I've always run adventure paths. But I'll tell you this, the adventure path in the book and what actually ends up in my game are usually two vastly different things. Great example, I ran the Horde of the Dragon Queen thing from Wizards of the Coast. And if you play D&D and you've run or played in that campaign, it's not great. At least from what's written in the book. It's got good bones, but the adventure itself leaves a lot to be desired. But the version that I ran was completely different from what was in the book. I'm at my best when I have an idea to riff off of. I'm at my best when I could take a villain who is pretty bland and turn it into something that I think is pretty memorable. So that's when I'm at my best, when I've got something to build off of, to morph, to change, to craft. I'm not at my best when I have a blank page in front of me. So this is where Claude really helps me. Maybe I have so Claude understands the macro of my campaign. It knows the villain, it knows the villain's ideas and the plot that's going to run through the game. So basically the plan that the villain has. It knows the players, it knows the locations, it knows a lot of the NPCs. And on a very macro level, I know generally some of the things the villain's going to need to accomplish in order to enact their master plan. I have a very broad idea of some of the larger beats that the players are going to need to interact with in order to sort of gain an understanding of this villain, what they're up to, in order to sort of interact with the larger campaign world. Where I don't always have all the answers are some of the micro specifics. And so I can sit down with Claude and be like, okay, this is where the players are now. Over here is where I want the players to eventually end up. And this might just be a location or something I want them to eventually discover as far as the villain's plot goes. And so I can be like, okay, what are some ideas on things that players might be able to encounter between here and there? And Claude, understanding my campaign, can give me some ideas. Now, some of those ideas are going to be garbage. That's just the way AI works. It doesn't always provide you with gold. But Claude, you'll usually give me 2, 3, 4 options or ideas on how to get from point A to point B. Sometimes I might like a little bit of the first option. I hate the second option. The third option has something going for it. And maybe that fourth option, I like something about that. But now I'm thinking. Now I don't have that blank page anymore. Now I've got some ideas because of something that Claude gave me that's consistent with my campaign world and consistent with my GM philosophy. And now I'd be like, okay, I could tell Claude, okay, I like this from option A. I hate option B. That doesn't really work for my campaign. Option C, I like this element of it. And then option D, this piece I like. And I'll explain to it what I liked about each one. It'll then take everything I just gave it and revise its thought process and the options that it gave me. And sometimes it'll come up with a framework that synergizes what I just gave it. And I'll look at like, okay, we're onto something here now. This works so much better than the first stage of this collaborative process. And I'll now be like, okay, I like this, I don't like that. Oh, here's where I think we can do it better. And now Claude and I are going back and forth. It's giving me its thought process, I'm giving it back my thought process. And we're now shaping and crafting and sculpting the idea that ultimately is going to make it to my game table in this collaborative back and forth process. And that right there, hands down, is the strength of using AI as a tool for game mastering. Now, if this seems interesting, if this has got your interest, then what I'm going to talk about next is a little bit more of the specifics on how you actually go about doing this. So I'm going to talk about this on a macro level. And then in future videos, I'm going to go into the specifics on how you can actually make this work. So the first thing you need to do is determine your AI model. Now, right now in June 2026, Claude AI is the one. There's no better AI model currently, and there's no better AI model for creative writing. The most famous one, of course, is ChatGPT, but I'll be honest, it's not the best at this. Claude is the one. If you're watching this much later in time, you might want to research which one is the best at creative writing at the time you're doing this. The next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to download it. And once you have it downloaded and installed, you can sign up for a free account. And I'll tell you right now on Claude, the free account, the AI model, Sonnet, is fantastic. You actually can't go wrong with using Sonnet. The only thing you're going to run into with the free plan is the daily limits. If you don't mind the daily limits, then you can actually stick with the free plan. I'm personally on the pro plan because I blow through the free limits. And every once in a while, I like to use their more advanced model, Opus, for when I need to do something a little bit more in-depth. Or I want something with a little bit of an AI model that hits a little harder and can handle more complex thinking for certain jobs that I give it. But for what we're doing right here, you can absolutely just stick with Sonnet on the free level. I would just say bump it, you can actually change its effort level. Just bump it up to high, use Sonnet on high, and you're going to be good to go for most of what you're going to do. So what are you going to do? The first thing you want to do when you get into Claude AI is set up a project. Mine is just titled Fallout for the Fallout campaign that I'm running. And once you set up that project, you're going to click into it and you're going to open up a new chat. And the first thing you want to do is create a master prompt. A master prompt is basically, these are the instructions for the project. The thing that tells it how to operate for you within this project. And the most important thing within this project is your identity as a GM. And so you're going to create a master GM prompt or a master game master prompt. This is where you're telling them everything it needs to know about you as a game master. That's the first thing you're going to do. Then the next thing you're going to do is so now you've given Claude context about you. Now you need to give it context about your campaign. So you're going to create a master campaign document. And now this is going to be in a second chat, a new chat that you're developing. So you're going to basically tell it everything it needs to know about your campaign. You're going to create a master campaign document, and you may also end up creating a number of supplemental context documents. This is what tells Claude everything it needs to know about your campaign. So now Claude understands you as a game master, and it now understands your campaign world. Now, the next thing you're going to do, and you're going to want to give Claude skills on all the specific things that are important to you as a game master. If you're running in Dungeons and Dragons or another game system, probably one of the things that's going to be important is encounter creation. What makes for a good encounter in your game? So when you're using Claude to generate encounters, you're going to want to tailor it to specifically what you're looking for, what's important to you. So you're going to want a skill for encounter generation. When you're creating NPCs, what are the specific things that you're looking for in your NPCs? You're going to want to create a skill for that. If you're going to be using Claude to generate stat blocks for you, you're going to want to create a skill for stat blocks. If you're going to be creating adventures right there in Claude, you're going to want an output skill. What are your preferences for formatting and how you want things structured? You're going to want to create a skill for that. I use Fantasy Grounds when I run my game. So I run an online game. And one of the banes of my existence is whenever I create custom content, whether it's custom items, custom monsters, importing that stuff into Fantasy Grounds. I mean, it's much better today in 2026 than it was years ago, but it is an onerous experience importing custom content into Fantasy Grounds. And if it's not formatted just right, things can be twitchy and it's a pain. But you can create a skill for creating fantasy ground mods. So when it's time for me to import content into Fantasy Grounds, I could take an adventure doc that has custom items, custom stat blocks for monsters, and I can be like, Claude, read this document and import all of these things into Fantasy Grounds for me. And it does it. Seamless, with very little effort. It's because we worked on creating the skill for it to do that. So these are all the things that you can do to enhance your game. Now, one last bit, and this one's a little bit more advanced. If you decide to take the deep dive that I did, watching videos on how to get the most out of AI, and trust me, I actually recommend that you do. It's what I did. It's how I learned how to do all of this. But one of the big things right now is using Obsidian Notes as a second brain. So basically, you use Claude Code, which is just a part of Claude, in order to synergize with Obsidian Notes, in order to essentially create a second brain that holds a wealth of information that Claude is able to use and curate and work from for you. Well, I did that, and right now, so in Obsidian Notes, it has all of my campaign lore, it has all of my characters' backstories, it has information on my players, it has all of my adventures, it has session logs from every game session that I run, and Claude has access to all of this. It is the ultimate context. So if you're just using the Claude AI chats, you're able to upload into the project files your context documents, the ones that I was talking about earlier. And so when you're on the go using Claude AI, it's able to have all the context it needs for you to create content no matter where you are. But if you're sitting at your desktop, or if you're on your laptop, you can set up an Obsidian Notes database in conjunction with Claude. And you can have the ultimate context when it comes to your campaign world and creating content. And that can take all of this to the next level. But that's all I'm going to touch on for today. And these are the things that I'm going to cover in the upcoming videos in much more detail. But what I would recommend for you now is if this seems like something that you're interested in, go ahead, download Claude. Or if this is much later in time, whichever AI is the best one. Specifically for creative endeavors, like creative writing specifically. Download it, sign up for it. You don't have to go pro necessarily, at least not at this point in time. And set up your project. Go onto YouTube, start looking at some of these different YouTube videos on how to maximize AI, how to get the most out of AI, how to become an AI master. If you search all of these things, you'll find a bunch of videos showing you a bunch of ideas and philosophies when it comes to leveraging AI. And that's not a bad place to start. Then tune into the next video that I'm going to put out that will go into more detail on how to do some of the things I talked about in the video today. If you've made it this far, thank you for tuning in, and I hope you found this helpful. Take care.